This is going to be a crash course in a schwack load of different growing mediums that you can use. And we're going to dig into a little bit of the science on each one of these mediums and why you may choose one over the other. And we're not talking just your classic peat and coir. We'll discuss those, but we're talking way totally different ones as well, along with some that you can actually just make at home. So let's get into it. So number one is peat. Let's just get this one out of the way. Peat is a sphagnum moss that has been ground down and turned into a light fluffy product. This light fluffy product is really high in acidity, and this higher acidity, this higher pH results in a very high cation exchange capacity. I'm going to say that word repeatedly in this video. Cation exchange capacity, CEC, is the ability for a medium to be able to uptake nutrients, as an example. So it's like a battery. The higher the cation exchange capacity is, the bigger the battery is. That means the more nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, micronutrients, sulfur, the actual medium can hold on to. That's a good thing, most cases. You usually want higher rather than lower. The other thing is water holding capacity. Water holding capacity is kind of wrapped up in cation exchange capacity to an extent, and that will also be another thing discussed. Very high in peat. I mean, you guys are familiar with it. I'm not going to go into too much. One thing I will say is that common misconception, you can add peat to soil to lower the acidity of the soil. That is not the case. Peat is not that acidic, and it's not going to make a difference to actual mineral soil. So just goodbye, not a thing. I just want to clarify something here. The peat that you find in the bag that just says Premier Peat or straight peat, not potting soil, that has a very low cation exchange capacity. Once the lime is added to help neutralize that pH that is at the 2, that's when the cation exchange capacity, the water holding capacity, truly reaches a new level. That means the peat that you would typically buy to go into the garden has zero impact on your soil because it's not possible. You want to know how to lower your actual pH of your soil? This video there, I actually tell you how to do it. The other thing is that it is very slow to decompose, which is wonderful because that means it helps soil hold its structure. It means it can be reused repeatedly in your containers if you chose to. Overall, great product to add fluff and structure. Now, the other benefit, hands down, is the fact that it's native to our area. Whether it's in Europe, which I know you guys, there's a little bit of rules around that, but North America, it's native, meaning it isn't going to introduce any invasive organic material or odd organic material. It's not going to introduce any really odd microbes, seeds, debris, that sort of thing. It's all native, and so therefore it's not going to have an ecological impact on the space. So that's another bonus. The disadvantage is that there's a lot of argument and maybe guilt about using peat. If you want to learn more about that, this video right here, it's a pretty unbiased approach to peat versus coir. Anyways, so there's that side of it. There also is the fact that when it dries out, it is incredibly hydrophobic, and have freaking fun rehydrating that shit because my goodness, it's impossible. Definitely a disadvantage for peat. So that's peat. Okay, next one, let's talk about rock wool, aka plant plugs. You've seen this stuff before. You oftentimes will see it if you get plants in the greenhouse. If you kind of pull away at the roots, you're going to see this little weird thing in the center. Sometimes that is rock wool, or that is a plug of some sort. This is a mineral wool. So it is actually mineral that has been spun into this material, which means it does not decompose. You can put this in the compost. You can put this in the garden. It's going nowhere. She's staying for a long time to come. So that is definitely a downfall of the rock wool. However, this stuff is amazing at holding on to moisture and amazing at holding on to nutrients. The other thing with this is while it's good at holding on to the nutrient in the water, it also has good airspace. So even if it's fully saturated, such as in a hydroponic situation, which is where we see this sometimes, it still has like 20% of the block is airspace, which is very, very cool, very unique to just this rock wool. Okay, next one is rock wool. This is little tiny, they're usually little blocks, they can come in big blocks. We see them in hydroponics. You can also use them in seed starting setups. Sometimes when you peel away at a greenhouse, when you get a plant, it has like a little fuzzy thing in the center. That's a rock wool. That's a plant plug, if you will. Now, this is a mineral item, meaning it's from the earth and it is a rock that has been spun up into what you see. I personally find it very itchy and uncomfortable to handle, but the reason why it's used is because when it's fully saturated, so say you do like a bottom watering seed starting setup, or you have this in like a hydroponic like cracky method where the thing is already always saturated into the water. This product is able to be fully saturated and still have 20% of it be air, which is important to allow for aerobic microbes, to allow for the roots to actually breathe, all that fun stuff. That's what makes it unique. The disadvantages to this, it's made out of rock, so it does not decompose. You put this in your compost, you get to live with it. You use it in your pots, you get to live with it. Do with that information what you will. The other downside to it is has a really low buffering capacity, meaning it has a very low cation exchange capacity, which in turn means that the product is very poor at holding onto water and nutrient when it's removed from the situation. So if you're not constantly monitoring it, topping it up on water, it's gonna struggle because it just doesn't have the capacity to hold on to things. The other part of this is that it is pretty alkaline, like it's not pretty alkaline, it's between a 7 and an 8, but in the world of plants, it's pretty darn alkaline. And because of that, you do need to consider adjusting the water you're using. And this is particularly true for anyone from a limestone based bedrock, Saskatchewan, I'm talking to you, your water is alkaline. You're sitting at like the 8 mark. And so because of that, you're gonna wanna put some pH down. You're gonna wanna bring the pH of your water down to be able to make up for the fact that this rock wool is so high. It's reusable. So you technically can reuse it repeatedly. If you dug it back out, you can reuse it next year. Maybe a benefit to you. It's expensive. It's an option. No mold though. 0. Because it's not organic. It's rock. Okay, next one is coir. Let's get this one all the way. So this one is viewed being the key word, as renewable. I go into this in a little bit of detail. And so you can put your own discretion on the fact of whether or not you think it's renewable. It has a cation exchange capacity between 100 milliequivalents per gram. Let's make sure they put it in grams and I'm not on drugs. Not that I'm not on drugs. Yeah, it's per 100 gram. Sorry, 100 gram. So that cation exchange capacity is good. It's not bad. It's a little bit lower than peat, but reasonable. Definitely up there with quality product. It has a leg up in the fact that it doesn't get that hydrophobicity. So it's not hydrophobic. You don't have to re-wet it. You just water it and it takes it up. I personally find it has a very low, depending on the quality of the coir you get, has a very low ability to be able to retain moisture. My preference is always to mix it with peat and or vermiculite because no, I do not like it from that world. That is definitely a disadvantage for me, is the water holding capacity, because I'm very lazy when it comes to watering. Now the disadvantage is that it's a little bit less acidic, and this acidity, the reason why it's beneficial is because in a seed starting setup, the acidity helps to kind of control to an extent factors that cause damping off, whether it's fungal, bacterial, etc. and so forth. A thought there, it is less acidic, so it just isn't as effective at doing it. The other issue is commonly salt. So salt very often is found in coconut coir just because that is the process of manufacturing the byproduct. And then the other part of this is that these are from coconut farms, monoculture coconut farms. And as you can imagine, just like any other agricultural application, we are using pesticides. Said pesticides go on the outside of the coconut into said fibers, and said fibers end up being dealt with and shipped to you from an industry that is not the best regulated. Do with that information what you will, just keep it in mind. The other thing is it's not native, so there's like a slight bio threat there as well, but I discussed that more in the other video. Okay, let's get into some interesting ones. Next up is rice hulls. So rice hulls can be used in medium on its own, but typically is mixed with pine bark, which we'll talk here about a little bit, or it can be mixed with peat at like the 30 to 40% mark. Now, the other really interesting thing about rice hulls is that there's different versions. So there's fresh, there's aged, there's compost, parboiled, and carbonized. So there's different options out there. Everything points towards parboil hulls being the superior medium. So if you're gonna go the rice hulls method, parboiled hulls is best idea. Now, the other thing with this group is that they have the pH, and the pH is right in that wheelhouse. It is a 6.7 to a 7.7 to a 6.5. She is right in the sweet spot, which is wonderful for plant growth. There isn't much adjustment you have to do in that case, particularly if you were to couple this with a peat, which I should mention this. If you're making your own DIY mixes, make sure you're adding dolomite lime if you're using peat, because it is so acidic that it actually can have the opposite intended effects. You actually need to bump that pH up with lime or the utilization of water from the tap that is a little bit more alkaline to kind of counteract it. That is more specific to like a very small scale setup, just FYI. So the cation exchange capacity of the rice hulls is low, which is why we would want to couple it with like a peat or a coconut coir setup. The other thing to keep in mind is that it is very high in magnesium. Let me check, I gotta check. I don't want to tell you guys lies. Fun fact. Next one is pine bark. So this is very specific. This is actually usually considered a waste product, and more specifically, it's used as mulches, and it's nice. It's a nice mulch actually. Not necessarily for like garden mulch, although you could use it in that environment. It could be for like walkways and that sort of thing. So it's a nice product to use. However, can make it work for potting soil, particularly if we can grind it up a little bit finer. If we were to grind this up or get finer pieces of pine bark, we still have a substantial amount of structure, and the fibers themselves are considered long. So if we couple this with heavier medium, peat for example, we can get a little bit of airspace in there. Now, the reason why we add, for example, perlite or pumice to a peat mix is because we need a little bit of air in there. And the only way to get air in something that otherwise would be pretty darn compact is via those products. However, you could use pine bark as the opposite. You would need a little bit more of it to be able to get similar effect, but ultimately speaking, it leaves some pretty nice gaps in there. It's native to North America. It's native pretty much wherever there's pine trees. As you can imagine, it's native. Now, the other part too is that it's biodegradable, so it's not like the rock wool in the sense that it's going to be around forever. Rice hulls also are obviously biodegradable. So those are definitely wins when it comes to pine bark as an option. So the downfalls of this is that pine bark is naturally acidic. It is in the same world as peat. So if we were to couple pine bark and peat together, we would want to also include dolomite lime. Now, with that being said, the pine bark can be mixed with other products to help balance that out, but it's something to keep in mind if you're noticing nutrient deficiencies showing up on what normally would be considered a lower acidity. You may want to consider bumping it up or doing some mitigation to try to get it into that direction. I think if it's mixed on a mass scale, which is a regular potting soil, just to help add bulk for less, perfectly fine. You're going to be absolutely okay. The other part is that it soaks up water very easily. So it's not hydrophobic like the peat is. And because of that, if it grabs onto too much, there's a slight concern that the product can waterlog the roots and the plants and all that sort of stuff. So I swear to God, I'm not even joking. I'm home alone, like always. And I literally just heard humming. I'm gonna have to play it back on the camera. That's why I like paused really awkwardly there. That was actually terrifying. I don't know what that was about. All right, well, ghosties, leave me alone. Okay, well, the last disadvantage to it is that it does float. So if you intend to use pine bark in a seed starting setup that you're wanting to bottom water with, if you're gonna soil block it, for example, or have it as a loose medium, there is a potential that it can float. And obviously this is disruptive to your setup, so you wanna avoid it in that case. A case where you don't, it doesn't matter, would be like a larger container. So I wouldn't use it so much in seed starting, but I would consider it as a cheap way to bulk up a potting soil because it's a good mimic for kind of peat moss. You couple it with some compost, you're okay. So that is pine bark, and this stuff is cheap. Next one is sawdust. So this one, I just want to make sure because so Douglas fir and Western hemlock are considered to give the best results. Red cedar is toxic, so stay away from that. Should never be used is what I have written here. So should never be used. You can go with the finer debris. There's nothing wrong with that. However, if you're looking for more structure for your soil, whether it's in ground or in a potting soil setup, you maybe want to go for something a little bit more coarse, and specifically planing, which woodworkers, Geek Crew, who's woodworkers, that's like when you take the blade and you kind of like fluff off stuff. That's what we're talking about there, is the planing debris. Benefits here is it is wonderful at being able to hold on to moisture, which, I mean, if we're talking using it in a mineral soil that is like a sandier soil, it's perfect for that. The downfalls to this is that if the sawdust has a disease and you have that plant in your yard, there's a potential that the pathogen problem will be spread onto the tree. It's been noted in a few cases, most of which were very like fleshy. Make sure you watch this because, I mean, they could take out a whole ecosystem of trees. So keep that in mind. You want to get something local. You know the source, you know there's no pathogenic issues. The other one is that they can be higher in salts. Now they're speaking to mostly sodium chloride. I'm not even joking. My camera just went from like fully charged to 0 really quick. I'm scared now. It's time for me to run away. It's past Halloween too, so like it needs to seriously cut it out. So the salt, that's where it was, salt. So the salt is considered high sometimes in this. Sodium chloride is like one that they repeatedly bring up in this. The solution to this, the good news to this, is that with coconut coir, with sawdust, with anything that is higher in salt, water is the solution. When in doubt, flush it out. Over fertilization, flush it out. High levels of salt content, flush it out. So what you can do to alleviate this issue is to literally run it through water, let it soak in water, filter it through water. You're good after you've done that. Now the next one is actually vermiculite. Vermiculite, if you do not know what it is, it's an inorganic product. It's not quite as nasty, if you will, as the rock wool. It is prevalent, meaning it's not going to just decompose. It is also not asbestos. I have a whole video on that. Please watch it. It's not asbestos. It was asbestos because of a mine way back when, but that mine's closed. That's not a thing anymore. And they test it. It's regulated, I promise. Regardless, this is wonderful for anyone who's experiencing high levels of fungal growth in their seed starting setups. Anyone who's wanting to start little tiny seeds, like little petunia or flower seeds. Wonderful product for that. It's also really good for any seeds that need light to germinate. So for example, photosensitive seeds like lettuce, great for that as well. It has a very high water holding capacity. It has a wonderful cation exchange capacity as well. And ultimately speaking, it can be used on its own in a seed starting setup. I wouldn't use it on a mass scale on its own. That'd be expensive and a waste of your money. But it can be used in that sense in a seed starting setup on its own. It can be used as a top, so a top dressing to potting soil, which is wonderful when we're talking about reducing fungal growth. And then the other way to use it is to actually like incorporate it into your soil. because it has such a high water holding capacity, it's not my first choice to incorporate. I would choose a pumice or a perlite over the vermiculite. But the reason why I kind of stage this as its own growing medium, not something that has to be coupled with something like a pumice or a perlite, is because it can work as a standalone on like the smaller scale seed starts, and actually is the preferred method when it comes to seed starting smaller seeds. So vermiculite, absolutely. Okay, so the next one is actually leaf mold. Leaf mold can be made by you, yourself, and I. It has a cation exchange capacity. It has a pH nearly identical to that of the fiber itself. Is very similar to like a coir peat texture, particularly if you've taken the time to remove any like twigs or sticks. Very nice, fine, fluffy product. It has great structure, so it can structurally help the soil. It isn't, you know, I would mix it with a pumice or a perlite to kind of fluff it and give some air to it, because it can be a little bit dense at times. It is long lasting, so it takes a little bit of time to decompose, and that actually, like, it's accounted for in the sense that it doesn't decompose super quick. So it can be reused, and it can be in the system, potting soil or otherwise, for a period of time. It's not going to just fall apart. With that being said, because it is so acidic and it is in the same world as the coir and the peat, you do want to consider adding lime or compost or something to dilute it, mix it up, so you can try to bring it back up into a better range. Definitely something to think about there. However, religious use of that is probably my favorite. It's hands down my absolute favorite product to use. And if you want to learn how to actually make this stuff, because it's so easy, you literally just need garbage bags, check out this video right here. And that video is what Google says you should watch. So listen to them, because they know more than I do. Talk to you guys next time. Bye.